My name is Ryan Perry. I'm the Digital Collections Librarian here at CLRC. And Ashley, if you want to jump on in.
Hi, I'm Ashley Beavers, and I'm the Digital Projects and Preservation Librarian.
Great. And so this event we've been doing for a number of years now, and I like to make it accessible both to people who have been working with us on projects for years, as well as folks who, might be brand new. I know there's a few people on here who are brand new to their positions or brand new to working with us here at CLRC. So we're going to start at the beginning when we talk about each service, and then we'll also talk about some of the new stuff and some of the things we're working on. So hopefully it'll be a little bit of something for everybody. It will be, I'm afraid, some kind of just talking at you guys for the first little bit. I want to have a discussion in the middle, and then I'm gonna talk about some stuff at the end too. So speaking of which, here's our agenda. We'll go through platform overview and updates for each of the main digital services that we offer. And then I'm hoping to have some feedback on some of our services, or what we could be doing better, what we could be doing more for you all. And then traditionally we've done like a mini webinar, or like kind of done something more of a deep dive in. And this year I'd like to talk a little bit about creating exhibits to be featured on New York Heritage, and we'll talk a little bit there as well. So yeah, please, again, if you have questions, interrupt me, and we'll dive right in. So we have a number of platforms and services that we offer here at CLRC, and I would say that nobody on here, I would wager, is participating in all of these. So some of this might be more relevant than others for the work you do at your institutions, or maybe it's something that you could be doing, but you just haven't fit in yet. So we'll start with kind of the big one, where Ashley and I spend the majority of our time, which is New York Heritage Digital Collections. New York Heritage Digital Collections is a statewide repository of cultural heritage materials. And really the focus for New York Heritage is on providing access. We have other services and other platforms that we use to do more preservation or long-term archival storage. But New York Heritage is really focused on making it easier for anybody with an internet connection to access your historical or cultural materials. And the fact that it's statewide, I think, is huge. Each library council, of which CLRC is one of 9 that each has a region around the state, each library council works with our members to contribute materials to New York Heritage, and we're able to kind of help you from the ground up. So selecting materials, digitizing metadata and upload, to varying extents, we help with all of that. Just to give a sense of scope, New York Heritage has over 1 million items or pages, if you count like the individual, most granular number you can get. This translates to around 365,000 objects. So every time like a yearbook will have 300 pages, you count that 300 times if you're looking at the page level, but object level, we have around 365. We've been adding about 30,000 site-wide items every year. So it definitely grows at a pretty good clip. And that includes in that 365,000 total, 33,000 objects from our region in New York, in central New York. There are also a lot of other institutions that are involved in this project. So 402 institutions from the 8 library councils that are represented. And this includes 58 institutions from the CLRC region. So we're not the largest contributor to New York Heritage, but we're definitely in the top 3, I would say. And we've been very active in this project since its beginning. And part of that is because one of the hats I wear is I'm the statewide project coordinator for New York Heritage. So in addition to working with you all locally in our region, I'm also helping to oversee the project as a whole, which has been a very rewarding experience. And it's been, talk a little bit more about that later in terms of what we're working on. So yeah, that's kind of the basic on what New York Heritage is. And it's used by a very wide variety of people, from students to genealogists to people just curious. And part of what we've done over the last couple of years is we've had these in place for a few years now, but I would like to remind people, if you aren't thinking about them actively, we have traffic reports. So this is shows snapshots of the page views and the demographics of the people who visit New York Heritage. The first one is statewide. So if you click on this link, which actually I can just do, it will take you to a report that loads a little slowly, but shows something kind of the demographics and a little bit about the people who are actually using New York Heritage, statewide. And you can click around. This is interactive. You can actually this map doesn't work right now, but you can actually click through it to this and see it better. So if you want to see a different time frame, or if you want to page through to find something that's relevant, this has a pretty wide access to data that's not immediately clear from just looking like a page you could print out, but you can interact with this and dive in a little bit as well. The other one we have is a granular report, which is probably more relevant for a lot of what you do individually. And this is helpful if you want to see who's actually using, how many people are using your collections. So keep in mind, a page view means every time somebody loads a page. So if you have somebody who's paging through a 100-page yearbook and they go page by page through it, that's going to generate 100 page views. So I bring up yearbooks because they definitely skew this. If you look at the largest traffic generators, they're places that have a lot of yearbooks. And you can go through and make this report what you want. You can change what months are showing. You can look at what, one institution at a time and kind of drill down there. This is a bad example because it's only been around for 1 month. I should have chosen one that was, that has been around longer. But you can kind of get the data that you might need for some of your reporting purposes for your stakeholders. I'm not seeing any questions in chat, so I'm going to assume that this is making sense to people. One other thing I want to, that was all I had to say about that slide. Okay, so next slide is on exhibits. So I think right around the time we had this meeting last year, last September, we were on the verge of printing and making available the immigration exhibit. So now we have a bigger update. We now have 3 exhibits that were produced by ESLN staff that have both online and physically circulating exhibit versions of the exhibits. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later in terms of structure. So I'm going to actually give a tour of what the exhibit platform looks like online. So this is, again, more of an announcement or a reminder. We have 3 exhibits that are pull-up posters that you can sign up to host in your space. Some of you have spaces that are more public than others, but these have been very popular in public libraries. Even some museums have borrowed them, and we have some that are circulating in schools as well. So you can go to these links, and these will have forms to fill out where you can request a specific month. And every month we have these exhibits at different locations. Immigration exhibit is the newest, so it's booked out the most. The other 2, the Erie Canal and the suffrage exhibits, are, they've been out for a little bit longer. So pretty much anytime you want those, they're currently available. I'm going to send out links over email at some point in the next month too, to draw up some more, to schedule these out a little bit more. But these are great ways to kind of bring an exhibit into your space. They're free for members. Some libraries have done kind of tag along events or brought in their own objects or brought in some other things, but you can also just literally set them up in a space you have in your library or historical society and have them be available. And then again, we're now accepting member contributions to our online exhibit platform. This is going to be the topic that I'll discuss in great depth later, but I just want to bring it up now while I'm talking about our updates. So Jason asked, how long is the borrowing display time? Just for ease for everybody, we've done it by calendar month. So every month we move it to the new place. So I usually will reach out. Myself or Mark Wildman, our director, will reach out. It's usually one of the two of us who will help move it from one institution to another. It's also very helpful when if you're close by to where it's coming from or going to, that you can move it yourselves. But we like it also as an opportunity to come out and visit many of you, but we'll often help. But it's so somebody has it. The immigration exhibit is currently at Cazenovia College, I believe, and then we'll be moving it to Maxwell Library, I believe, for the next month. So it makes it easier. Usually around like halfway through the month, I have to remember like, oh, I have to make sure I make arrangements for the exhibits to move to the next spot. So some more general updates. Oh, preview contents. Sorry, I'm going to answer Jason's follow-up question before I go on to the next thing. So I think in the past I might have had a slide that showed the exhibits, but if you click through to the link, here's a photograph of the Erie Canal exhibit. The tablet no longer circulates, but there's 4 posters, and you kind of get a sense for how big they are. They go, not quite to the ceiling, and and the content, and I'm going to talk about this more later, but the content is distilled down from the online version, so you get a sense for what the tone and the scope are from that. You could also like try to zoom in and like see if you can kind of read parts of it, which probably are actually it's not too like you can almost read the content but from the picture. So your mileage may vary, but that's certainly possible. And all 3 have Google Forms like this that you can look through, and there's a list of this current schedule, so you can see if they're booked for the months you might want before you make the request. So more general updates on New York Heritage. We have 2 new contributors from our region. The Cazenovia Public Library and Oneida Community Mansion House have both posted their first collections. There's a number of you, even on this call, that are kind of in the wings or have materials that are due to be put up, but those are the 2 we've done in the last 12 months. It's always great to see more regions and more institutions represented. One of the projects I worked on a statewide basis was drafting a migration preparedness plan. So New York Heritage is currently being hosted by Content DM, which is a repository platform put out by OCLC, which is a library vendor. And we have no plans to migrate, so I want to quell any concerns there. But it was determined that it would be a good idea to have a sense for what it would look like if we had to migrate. So if something dramatically changed at OCLC, or if something changed in our circumstances, to kind of have a sense for the landscape. So we went through and kind of identified some things that we could do to make ourselves more nimble. With over 400 institutions, there's only so nimble you can be. you know, we identified some potential, what platforms would most meet our needs in case. And again, it's just purely as a, you know, precautionary measure. We don't have any plans to migrate. That would be a lot of work if we ended up going that route, and you know, but we wanted to play it safe. And on kind of a similar note, I am currently sitting on a nationwide, maybe even international panel that is advising OCLC on some development work they're doing with Content DM. So they're, for those of you who have interacted directly with Content DM, it's pretty clear pretty quickly that the software and some of the underlying technology is aging. And they finally got to a point where they're looking to rebuild from the ground up, you know, including probably getting rid of the project client software and switching over to more web-based applications. But thankfully, they're also looking at I get the sense they're looking at the data model. So the data model is very, very flat, but looking more towards like linked open data and interoperability with other platforms. So myself and Jen Palmentero, who works at Southeastern, are both on this panel, and we'll see what comes of it. We've only met once in that group, but hopefully they'll take our feedback to heart, especially New York Heritage being unique in that we're a large consortia that use a product that is primarily used by single institutions. So there's an extra set of challenges. They've been responsive in the past to other things. I'm hopeful that will continue with whatever they come up with next. And then the final update I have for New York Heritage is we're nearing completion on a new version of the metadata dictionary. I feel like I've been saying we've been nearing completion since the beginning of the summer, and I'm hopeful in the next month or two that we'll have it published and ready for public viewing. But a lot of this, we try to do it every 2 or 3 years. We'll go through and kind of update and our recommendations for best practices based on our ever evolving, you know, feelings on metadata and what is most effective for our users. And also we've switched to a new, this is, you know, over a year ago now, but we switched to a new version of our front end, our Drupal, you know, where all the landing pages are. So we are updating the metadata dictionary as well to fit what the reality of our website and how to interact with it is now. So be on the lookout for that. I'll send it out through our Google group, as well as other channels when it is ready. And there aren't too many earth-shattering changes, but we'll have a change log in the beginning that explains, you know, these are the changes that we made that are relevant that you need to know about. If we change where a comma is, you don't need to know about that, but you know, if we change something measurable, it'll all be right there at the beginning. All right. Moving right along, New York State Historic Newspapers. Just to give the overview for the uninitiated. This one's a little bit easier to explain than New York Heritage. It's really just a repository for newspapers. New York Heritage has a much broader set of materials that are included, and this one's about as straightforward as it comes. This repository is managed in Northern New York, so the Library Council to the north of us, and they do a lot of more of this themselves than we do here with New York Heritage. This is a searchable database of newspapers, and it includes newspapers from representing all counties of New York State. And really, you participate in this service by making sure you have copyright clearance for the newspapers you have in your collection, and you can either request a quote for Northern New York to digitize your newspapers for microfilm, or if you have digitized or choose to digitize with an outside vendor, we can also send them digital files. So it's a great resource. It probably sees more overall traffic than New York Heritage, especially because it's clear what you're getting when you go there. And it's great. It's always great to see more newspapers contributed from our region. Yep, and Bonnie's chiming in from Beeville and town of Lysander, and they have had a couple of grants over the last few years to digitize their newspapers, some of which we've done in-house. We did a couple of small runs, and then the rest they've just sent. And it's really great to have it keyword searchable. That's a great point, Bonnie. So like you have the microfilm in your collection, but if you're looking for something like a name and you don't know what year or where to look for it, instead of scanning through page by page through, a ton of issues on a microfilm reader, you can type in the keyword and the OCR works fairly well, and it often will find the results. So I think it really does do a lot to open up your collection and have it get a lot more use than it's going to sitting on a microfilm canister in your collection. So a couple updates on the newspaper project. So they have over 11 million pages available currently. They're kind of edging towards 12 million. I don't know exactly how long it'll take them to get the next almost 300,000 pages or whatever. They like tracking those milestones because I'm sure just the grind of adding thousands and thousands of pages of newspapers. It helps kind of quantify it in a way. So in order to get a quote or to arrange, if you're sending your microfilm to them, you need to make sure you email them at digitization@nnyLN.org. They currently have a wait list to digitize microfilm, and this is actually a good thing because that way your microfilm won't sit on a shelf in their office for a while. You'll be able to send it to them more closer to when they'll actually digitize it. But my recommendation here is, and I did this with Bonnie and believe was it Rebecca Hewitt from SUNY Poly. As soon as I told you about your grants, I told you to email them immediately so you can get on their list, because it does take a long time. So this tool here is really helpful to look at, especially if you are sending things or plan to send things. You kind of get a sense for their timeline. I was just telling Ashley earlier this morning that I'm jealous of this, and it'd be nice to try to get some of this for our services. But you can see they have reserved, which is their wait list. It looks like Bonnie must have just sent them their next set of newspapers, so they just received those. But you can kind of see where they are. So you scroll down, and they do run some of the processing and OCR out of a vendor I believe that's based out of India. So there is a little bit of a bottleneck at a certain point. And then you can look and see what's next to be ingested. So they've had OCPL's newspapers on here for a while, so I'm hoping to see those soon. You can also go up here, and they don't currently have any scheduled, but you can see they'll have them on here so you can see when they plan to do ingest. So you can kind of check here as well to see when things are. And when they say ingest, that means like they're posting it to the site and it'll be publicly available in theory after that date. So the other thing to note is they're also in a similar stage where they're looking at aging technology, and they're hoping to kind of figure out a plan for the next This was just recently announced to us internally at a recent meeting. And I don't know, there's really not much to share there. They're just kind of looking at where they are, what else is out there. And, they're also really concerned. They want to make sure that they're not changing for a change's sake. They want to keep in mind that their user base tends to be change resistant, and they don't want to make it harder to use, but they want to improve the service. So Rebecca McLean from Oneida County History Center asked if they only digitize microfilm, or can they do physical papers as well. So Northern New York can only digitize microfilm. They charge a reasonable rate for that. So it's 15 cents a page, which they estimate about how many pages are usually on a reel. And they can give you a quote pretty quickly for that. If you have physical papers, there are two options for that. Depending on what it is and how much you have of it and what size it is, we can do some things in-house through our DigLab. Ashley can talk a little bit about that later, really show some of the setups that we use for those. And then if it's beyond our means, or if it's not practical for us to do it, there's also a number of vendors that can do it. Advantage Archival has been a popular one in our region in the past. We have a vendor list that's listed on our grant website and elsewhere. You can see a full list of vendors. Sometimes they'll actually say who can do newspaper. It's definitely cheaper to do from film, but obviously you hope that the film was done well in the first place. And if you don't have film, you don't have film. So there are options. And Rebecca or anybody else, if you have projects, you can talk to us about it as well. Yeah, and thank you, Rebecca Hewitt at SUNY Poly for adding the link to their titles that were recently added. They've received grants from us. This is the third year in a row, and we kind of broke their project up into manageable bites. And they have quite a bit up there now, which is awesome. And it's great to see, again, more representation from our region and local papers on this service. Okay. The next few, I'll probably go a little bit quicker through. I'll try to. Sorry if I'm talking a lot. I thank you so much for everybody putting questions in the comments to kind of break me up a little bit here. So Empire Archival Discovery Cooperative is a statewide repository for finding aids. Finding aids, if you're not familiar with them, are essentially guides for researchers to use physical collections. So if you're researching the Erie Canal, to use my usual go-to example, and you want to know which repositories in New York State have physical collections that relate to the Erie Canal, you can go onto Empire ADC, search for the Erie Canal, and look through their inventories and their collection descriptions to see if the collection would be worth your time to go do research on site. Sometimes these collections have been digitized in part, at least, but the idea here is this opens up a much wider set of materials that either are impractical to digitize, or not cost effective, or they just haven't gotten to them yet. And this project has been around for a few years, but it's really reached maturity now that it's a little bit, there's more on there to use, and there's better tools to contribute to it. It does allow contributors to produce the finding aids within the system too. So it is a repository where you can go and browse finding aids. You can also use it and use the tool that we built in it to create the finding aid there. And finding aids don't necessarily have to have inventories, so that can be helpful. But if you just have a collection description, so you have the Judy B. Jones papers or whatever, and you can describe who Judy B. Jones is, and have a scope note that gives a sense of what's in the collection. And this will if you have collections that fit this kind of level of internal organization, this can be a great way to expose them to a wider audience. You can certainly put finding aids on your own website, but putting them in a statewide repository allows people who aren't necessarily aware of your institution to find them easier. This service is managed by Southeastern New York Library Resources Council. I sit on the advisory committee for this, but it's definitely run out of Southeastern, and they're trying to transition more of it to more of the training and hand holding to the local councils. So I've been doing more of that lately, but we also have a great resource in their team over there that has more of the work with it on a more intimate level. And really the changes in the last year with Empire ADC have been more incremental, which is good. It shows that the product has matured more. It's not like we're not moving mountains anymore. We had to rebuild the forum tool. We had to rebuild a lot of the site, and now it's been more incremental fixes. There is a cost model in place. This was actually true as of last year, but so you have to fill out a application to join, and there are, in theory, setup fees and annual fees to participate in this project. CLRC will cover first year fees, so we'll cover the setup fee and or your first year of usage fees. But the good news is a lot of folks would actually qualify for this service being free. So if you meet the minimum requirements, which are different depending on what type of institution you are. But to use an easy example, if you work at a historical society and have fewer than 20 full-time equivalent staff, then you qualify for free. And academic institutions will look at your materials budget and stuff like that. So this is a great resource. If you have finding aids or have the ability to create finding aids, we can do some training on the creation process, but a lot of it is more dependent on whether you're ready for it. We can also harvest sets of finding aids that already exist. So Syracuse University, for example, has produced thousands of finding aids internally. We can, I don't know exactly which mechanism we're using for them, but we can pull from a directory all their finding aids and update them in our system on a periodic basis, which is helpful for larger institutions. So yeah, if you have questions about Empire ADC, you can reach out to Ashley and I, and we can kind of talk you through what it would look like. And if you aren't quite at this point, there are also other resources that we can direct you towards. So there's the Documentary Heritage Program Services of New York, or Preservation Services of New York State, which is DIPSNY is the acronym. And DIPSNY has some great resources for like getting you to the point where you might be able to produce finding aids. All right, the last slide that I have, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to talk about some of the work that she does. One of several grant projects we've had over the last year is participating in this Consider the Source New York project, which several of you on the call are familiar with and have worked with us on. For those of you who have not heard of this or are less familiar, this project is doing a lot of things. I'd say it's like the headline is that it's helping to connect K-12 educators, including school librarians, with local repositories that hold materials, especially primary source materials, that could be helpful in their instruction. And then there's another kind of twist on that where we're looking to increase access to primary source materials, especially those that document underrepresented populations, which has been challenging in that if it's underrepresented, then it's often hard to find in physical repositories, let alone online. But we've made some great progress, and we have added some materials that fit that mold. And then the final component of Consider the Source is that there's currently a team of educators from each region. So they mapped it also onto the 9 Library Council regions. So in our region, there are 4 educators that are all writing lesson plans based on the prompts to bring in primary source education and use materials from local repositories. So this has been like, you know, a good portion of my year so far has been working on this project, but it's also been very rewarding. We over the summer we hired a temporary digital project assistant, Brian Horahan, who was doing some of the digitization work on behalf of 3 institutions. So we had Oneida County History Center, which gave us kind of a great grab bag of materials ranging from Brothertown Indian tribe to women's rights, women's suffrage, and then also some great materials on the Erie Canal and agricultural documents. So we kind of had a great set of materials from them. Oneida Community Mansion House, which we were able to get all the way to completion in terms of being a New York Heritage and consider the source. They made some materials that available that highlight gender roles in their very unique community that existed in the late 1800s. And then finally, Onondaga County Public Library, OCPL, their central local history and genealogy department. We worked with them and actually held a meeting there, and we digitized a bunch of materials there. The highlight there for me has been the set of oral histories that were conducted by the Human Rights Commission in the 1980s that interviewed a lot of people who were active in the 60s and 70s in Syracuse. And we're currently in the process of transcribing those and getting those up. So yeah, it's been a great experience. We also held a institute back in April that some of you came to, where we had repository, people working in repositories, educators and librarians kind of all in one space, which was really, seemed to go over very well with everybody who attended. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this project. And we might have more funding available. I'm going to kind of regroup and try to finish up some of the current projects, and we might be able to do some more stuff. One thing that I forgot to mention, 2 things I forgot to mention with this, and Jason, seeing Jason's name in the comment prompted me. Jason has been very great about sharing materials to consider the source from the town of Elbridge. And he also attended the event, and I know a couple other people did as well. The other person, I don't know if she is on, she might be on, I didn't see her name earlier, but Catherine Stam, who is a professor at SUNY Poly and is also works with the Midtown Utica Community Center. She is currently working on gathering some materials documenting the experiences of refugees before they came to New York. And so she's doing digitizing some of their materials and doing some like light oral history work with them. So it's great to have more of this represented so teachers can use. Yeah, and Roxanne's comment, yeah, it's great to have for teachers, and we do have a wealth of history, and it's nice to make it more accessible. So it's been a lot of work, but it's been good work. It's been good to make it to make some progress in this. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to go through her stuff. And Ashley, we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but if you want to tell me when you're ready for the next slide, you can go ahead and I'll switch it for you.
Yeah. So in the DigLab for the in-house projects, we did digitize materials like manuscripts, yearbooks, photographs, and newspapers. And recently we have digitized some photograph slides and glass plate negatives. And then after or while digitizing, we do the metadata for each project and then upload to either the New York Heritage website or send along to the New York State Historic Newspapers website. And metadata can be done by someone else, like an intern. And in that case, we will train the individual or individuals to use our metadata spreadsheet. And so then after the in-house project has been uploaded, we prepare a copy of it with its metadata to be put into the digital dark archive which I'll get into later. We primarily do projects that have been submitted through the Access and Digitization grant, but we can do contract projects, which range from finishing up a project a member organization started, but were unable to finish it themselves, to a member organization having to move their materials to a new building or into storage, and they want to scan some of them before they move them. And so these digitization and metadata services are available to CLRC members, and we're getting better at estimating the hours it will take to complete a project. And also, it never hurts to look ahead and contact Ryan or myself about having your materials or collection be digitized by us. We can come do a site visit or we'll look at the materials and let you know what steps to take next. And Jason asked, is it possible to get an example of the copy of that spreadsheet to help guide our own digitization? Yes. Yeah. We did give them that. Oh, thanks, Ryan. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. And currently we're still catching up and are about halfway through the 2021 projects. We now have a DigLab page for our website. We've also created a yearbook and digitization policy, which came about this past summer while looking through yearbooks and seeing if our members have a yearbook policy. And if they do, making sure all the yearbooks have been uploaded depending on what the policy is. And if some yearbooks have already been uploaded and the policy says up to a certain point, we will remove those yearbooks and upload them in future years. And we are still working on getting in touch with those who have yearbooks already uploaded. And some examples of yearbook policies are holding for 10 years or holding for 5, no yearbook policy, or uploading after the freshmen have graduated. And that's if they only have freshmen. They don't have any younger students being shown in the yearbook. And next slide. Oh, that's a question. Tim asked, do we digitize VHS tapes? Not at the moment, and I don't know about in the future. I'm sure that there are vendors who might, Ryan might possibly know.
Yeah, we haven't done VHS tapes. We tried cassette tapes the first time for Consider the Source. So I feel pretty confident about VHS or even, yeah, sorry, I feel confident about cassette tapes, but VHS, we aren't really set up to do. There's Industrial Color Labs here in Syracuse that does that, but they're very more consumer focused, but you could probably get the quote for VHS tapes as well.
So here's some of our in-house equipment. So on the left is the copy stand with an Oakwood Cemetery register in the process of being digitized. Then on the right at the top is the ATEES, which does yearbooks and bound materials, as it has like a cradle, if you can kind of see it. And then below is the KIC, which does newspapers and other materials. Next slide. Digital Dark Archive. It's essentially making a copy of a project or projects with its files and metadata and then storing it long term. So it's a backup of a backup. So there's a backup of that project somewhere else. So in the case of a disaster and files are lost or destroyed, or the external hard drive that stored those files is destroyed, there's still a complete copy of that project or projects that you can retrieve if you need it. And we recently were told the amount it is to retrieve it, and it is $20 per 100 gigabytes. So this is just a backup of your backup. So you may not even need it, but you have it just in case something bad happens. And next slide. The update on the digital dark archive is that we're still behind on submissions, but a few more projects have been sent into it. And we've also implemented that each in-house project that we have has an additional step of it being prepared to be put into the digital dark archive. And we are focusing on catching up on digital dark archiving, or DDAing, all of the in-house projects. And we hope to someday open it up to non-New York heritage materials. And now Ryan will continue on with the rest.
Thanks, Ashley. And really the last slide we have in this segment is access and digitization grants. This is more of an announcement or a reminder. We're going to do a full, well, a lot more communication and a full webinar about these. But I like to announce it now because it's never too early to start thinking about these projects and doing some of the groundwork. The CLRC typically has around $40,000 that we give out in access and digitization grants to fund metadata creation, digitization, and other similar projects. We'll be accepting applications for this money starting sometime in November and going through the end of January of next year. And these projects, I could have mentioned this on every slide, but if you have like specific projects in mind or something you want to talk to us about, we'd be happy to meet with each one of you individually. We can come out and visit your space, or we can do it over Zoom, but we can talk about your specific projects and what you're hoping to do and whether we can help you with it. And these access and digitization grants are a great way to fund either somebody at your library, if they're or an outside vendor, or you can actually apply for this as Ashley mentioned, to have Ashley digitize your materials on your behalf at the DigLab. So you don't actually get a check mailed to you. We just kind of set aside that money in our budget, and we can talk through that. We tend to talk through those projects on an even more detailed basis, because we would write you a quote for what we think how long it would take, and what the cost would be of that service. So it's definitely something to consider if you have projects that you'd like to do. And while we'll be really moving into this starting November, if you want to meet with us sooner than that to discuss specific projects, we'd be happy to meet with you. Ashley addressed Jason's question. It's the digital archive is really like an insurance plan for your data. So like the idea is, there's a cost to us as a library council, but we don't pass that cost on to you unless you need the data back. So it's really a just in case kind of thing if you aren't able to get it anywhere else, as Ashley mentioned. So we're working on, Ashley's been doing a great job over the last few months catching up. We're so busy with other projects that we don't always get through to the last steps of getting your materials sent on, but we're gonna continue to improve on that. All right, and I have a 5-minute break on here, but we might just kind of keep moving through unless people need to leave. And really, if you have, I'll take the break will be, does anybody have any other questions or anything you want us to talk about from what we talked about so far? And then we'll go on from there. So if you need to step away as well, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, we are recording this. So if you need to leave, I'll make the recording and our slides available, within the next day or so. So if you missed part of it, not a problem. So I might just kind of jump into the next part, which is really on a similar basis of what I was just asking. You know, I'd like to have the opportunity to get some feedback on our services, and this is easier in person where I can kind of you know, solicit feedback a little more directly, but I don't want to cut it out because I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to give us feedback on anything we could be doing better. So in an effort to kind of prompt this conversation a little bit more, I'm curious if there are any like major roadblocks for your digital projects. So any of the stuff that we've been talking about, if you're looking at it and like, I'd like to participate in that, but like, I really just can't get started because of X, Y, and Z. A lot of our services over the last few years have been prompted by looking at those roadblocks and saying, how can we fix it? How can we make it easier? So if anybody has any feedback on that point, you know, you're welcome to jump on audio if you want to say it out loud, or you know, type it in chat.
I do if I can.
Yes.
And we've talked about this and everything, is about trying to track down the copyright ownership towards newspaper articles and documents post 1927. And that I also, piggybacking onto that, then also realized that with the discussion about the yearbook policy and everything, that probably in terms of the yearbooks that we have to get in and talk with the school district here, because they most likely own the copyright to the yearbooks and such. So it's, for me, it's just realizing the intellectual property copyrights and everything, and making sure to try to follow that, as well as balance out then the desire to get the information up and out and available to people.
Yeah, the copyright's a huge one, and I think it's, you know, so I think I may have managed to get through this whole talk without bringing up explicitly. I don't know how I did that. Usually, it's like every slide, it's like, oh, copyright, copyright, copyright. But that's the kind of the elephant in the room, right? So you might have a wonderful collection, but do you have permission to share it? And it's rarely as cut and dry as you want it to be, because if it's clear that like so and so produced this, you know, when they did, and crucially sometimes when they passed away, if it's an individual creator, that can be really difficult to parse. And I have done, like, so the webinar portion of this meeting, I have done one on copyright a few years ago. And it's really hard to talk in general terms because it's so specific to what you're talking about. So this is something where, like, if you ever get stumbled up on this, reach out to Ashley and I. We can try to talk you through it best we can. Ashley is great at identifying years and you know, dating objects. She's been really good. Like, she did a whole, I think it was last year, she did a whole webinar on dating photographs, or sorry, postcards. So like there's definitely you know, there's a lot there. And yearbooks can be a little bit easier because in my understanding, and this was reaffirmed. I read a Ask a Lawyer post where a lawyer weighed in on this. If the yearbooks were produced by the school would own the copyright. Obviously, they're published by an outside entity, but that outside entity would not assume copyright. So you're right that you'll need to, yearbooks are a common one, so it's easy to, you know, it's useful to talk about in this context. Yearbooks, I would look and say, you know, can you get permission from somebody with authority at the school district? And the other bit that's helpful there is if you're already reaching out to ask permission, you might ask if they have copies that you're missing, because oftentimes for yearbook projects, they end up being a combination of things that the library or institution has themselves. They reach out to other institutions in their community, and then they sometimes also will reach out to the public if they have a good forum for doing that. And really, that's you know, it takes a lot of work, and I think we're happy to talk you through it. You were talking, newspapers are another one that we've gotten slightly better at, where like enough other institutions have digitized local newspapers that were often owned by the same publishers, so you can kind of work through that a little bit more. But yeah, if there's a one-size-fit-all thing or something we could do to smooth that out, I really wish that were the case, but it's hard. And Rebecca asked in chat if there's a recording of Ashley's webinar. Yes, there is. And that actually brings up a great point where like, I wouldn't want to share like the full talk that I've given, because, if you watch the updates from 2 or 3 years ago on our platforms, that probably has changed, but I can look and see if I can edit out the parts, if I haven't already, edit out the webinars, because we have a few of those. We had one on, I don't know if the one on copyright was recorded or not, but like several that we've done over the last few years that would be still relevant. Yeah, so we'll look into that. That's great feedback. Because Ashley did do a great job of it. It was very well presented. So yeah, I'm going to ask another question, but it's if you have feel free to jump in on any of these points that you see on the slide. And like, are there any other services that we could be offering in this area, or like gaps in what you what would be helpful? This may be a little bit harder in some ways to address, but if it's within our means, we will do what we can. And part of this is I'm prompting it, I'm saying it out loud in a meeting, but on the other hand, if you think of stuff after the fact, after we get off, email us. Rebecca, did you have something else, or was your hand raised?
I had a question.
course.
I know we're new to CLRC, so I'm still learning about all the awesome resources. But do you have any sort of list of recommended equipment for digitization? I just feel like some of our stuff is outdated. We have a decent book scanner, but I think everything else we're behind the times, and I'd like to make sure we're doing it properly as we're moving it forward.
We don't have a specific resource about that. I think some of that might be like, in an ideal world, I don't know if you even would want one, because some of it's like, Ashley or I could talk you through like what your specific needs are and what the landscape looks like now. Honestly, like flatbed scanners have changed like barely at all in the last 15 years, it seems. So like we have a really old scanner and we got a newer version of it, and they're functionally equivalent. Like I can't see a single difference in them, and they're probably 10 years apart. But book scanners change a lot, and I think the landscape changes a lot. So depending on what you're looking for, we did some research a few years ago when we were buying our ATEEZ scanner, but I'm not even sure that's relevant now.
Okay. Thank you.
And the other thing, I'm not sure we said this out loud, but we can loan flatbed scanners for sure. We could maybe lend our copy stand that you kind of see in the background of Ashley's shot there. It does break down and could be packed up. We aren't really able to do it right now because we're using it, but we often, if you need something for like a scanning device, if we don't have it to lend, sometimes we can, if there's a request for it, we can justify buying something that we could then lend. We stopped really, I don't like to see access and digitization grants go towards buying equipment, because I'd rather buy equipment and then lend it to people as they need it. So if you need something, I would say, ask us whether we have it, or we can make recommendations, and we can either, if it makes sense, we could buy something or lend it or make recommendations. So. Yeah, that's great, Jason, to point out the New York State Archives has some good resources. Yeah, I mean, we end up in our little silo over here, and there's great resources at the State Archives, State Library, and the DIPSNY program that I mentioned earlier. We all kind of overlap slightly, but we have our own lanes to a certain extent. So, yeah, and I'd say a lot of it, like, the kind of soft service that we offer is consultation. So, like, if you have questions, I either will try to, Ashley and I can try to answer it, or sometimes we also can point people towards other experts in the region. So, like, to give an example, Kara Howe at Upstate has been one of my go-to experts in archival practice, because she works at a medical university and has great archival experience. So, like, sometimes I'll say, okay, I don't know the answer to this, but you might ask her, or, so we know enough, we know people around the area who, if we don't know, might know. So we can help in some way or another. And then the final question I'm going to ask, and feel free to jump around again if you have anything to comment on any of these, if there are any topics that would be helpful to cover in a webinar. And this is tricky, like, copyright would probably be something that would be interesting, but so much of it is so specific to a project that sometimes it can be difficult. But if there is something that would be helpful, broadly speaking, we're always looking for webinar suggestions. We haven't done as many, like, webinars in this kind of realm lately, because there have been, DIPSNI's offers a lot, and there's other library councils like Long Island, for instance, that offer a lot in this area. But if there's a request, we would do our best to try to meet it. So keep that in mind. Again, I've shifted away from doing broad stuff. Like, we don't really do metadata training sessions, for instance, because I'd rather talk to you guys individually and say, what are your specific needs? But if there is a topic that would be broadly interesting, we could try to find a speaker and try to put it together. Any other feedback? Like, anything else that you guys want to bring up? The other thing that's interesting with this group is it's technically on our website listed as a special interest group, and we technically have a forum. We have a Google group. We have a listserv, but functionally, it's been very top down in that, like, Ashley or I will communicate out to you all. But if there's anything ever that you guys would like to see in terms of, like, treating this more like a panel of experts, because you guys are all experts in your own way, and your own, you guys all have something to bring to the table. It doesn't always feel like that. It's easy to have, like, imposter syndrome or whatever, but it would be great to have suggestions or anything that would kind of build community amongst all of you who are doing this work across our 4-county region. All right. Yeah, again, if you think about things after we get off, we can certainly, we'll address them the best we can. And I always welcome feedback. I always welcome suggestions. And, if you have questions, we'll either try to answer them ourselves or send them to somebody who can. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna go on to our final bit of the day, and I'm gonna give an overview of our exhibit platform. So the idea here is that we've had this platform for a few years now. We built it ourselves, and we've mostly put it up as material, or we mostly done exhibits that we produced as library council staff, but we are opening it up to member contributions. So if you have something that might fit this mold, it'd be great to have some folks from our region send some, put something together. That being said, this can be a lot of work, and I don't want to minimize that work. there are some times where you could take something you already have or something you've started to put together and adapt it to our format. A little bit before I get into the individual exhibits, our model, as I said, was built. It's a custom built platform. It's not Omeka. It's not anything that you could buy off the shelf. It was built by Chuck Henry, who works at Northern New York and is basically our web developer for the New York Heritage website. And it was based off of the template from the Digital Public Library of America. So it was, they say is necessity is a mother of invention. We produced 2 exhibits as we were in the process of leaving DPLA for reasons I won't go into right now. And we had an exhibit that needed a home. So if you go on the Digital Public Library of America, which by the way is an awesome resource, it's like a meta search for all sorts of repositories all over the country. And they do have a few exhibits on there. And they do have our 200 Years in the Erie Canal exhibit. So that exhibit's there, but the women suffrage exhibit, by the time that was ready, we weren't able to put it up there. So we built our own platform. And it's based on the DPLA model, which is actually pretty good. Like it doesn't necessarily fit everything, but it does a reasonably good job of it. And these are the 3 main exhibits that we produced as an ESLN staff in conjunction with our expert curators, one of whom is on the call. Dan Ward was one of the curators of the Erie Canal exhibit. So, and I think these were a lot of work in that it took a lot of coordination and a lot of, work to do the logistics, but there are ways that we could have made it way simpler. And I think for any of you on this call, it would probably be simpler than it was for us. So the way we did these were there's online exhibits, which you can view on the New York Heritage website. And then we also distilled it down, as I mentioned earlier, and there's physical exhibits that circulate to member libraries. That is not a requirement. If you were to do your own exhibit, you could just do an exhibit online only. You don't need to do the other steps. We received outside funding for the Erie Canal and women's suffrage exhibits from the Humanities New York Action Grant, I believe it was. But then we tried applying for funding for the immigration exhibit, and we didn't get a grant for that, so we didn't end up doing it anyway. There are 3 other exhibits that have been put up in our exhibit platform that were mostly still ESLN staff, but more at local councils. So I believe the census and the Georgia exhibits were both done by Western New York, and the Hurricane Agnes was done by South Central, the library council based out of Ithaca. But it'd be really great to see more of these. So we do have a full exhibit policy document that's available on New York Heritage, and I've linked to it in the slides, which I'll send out later, so you can click on this and read it in full. But just kind of summarize for everybody on this call. We try to make this pretty open. Like most of our policies with New York Heritage, we'd rather have it be on a case by case than have a bunch of rules and regulations about what we're going to do. So the scope of an exhibit can focus on a range of topics, both big and small. So if you're producing an exhibit that's more related to materials that you yourself have in your own collections, then obviously the scope would probably be much smaller than what we have done for some of our exhibits that were statewide. There should, however, be some relevance and some connection to New York State history or culture. So it would be inappropriate to do an exhibit on statues in Washington, D.C. I don't know why that was the first thing that came to mind, but like that likely does not have any connection to New York State history, so it wouldn't really be a good fit for New York Heritage. So Jason asked, do you have to have enough material to make a full exhibit? So I think you wouldn't necessarily have to have it yourself, but you'd want to see that it's available through like other means, or you'd want to partner with another organization that has material that would be helpful. So this actually jives really well with the next bullet point here. So source. So majority of materials should be available in New York Heritage. They don't necessarily have to be your materials, but they could be materials from across the state. And we also, and this is also following the DPLA model, we would pull materials from Library of Congress, from other repositories outside of New York State, New York Public Library, some of the other organizations in New York City that aren't affiliated with New York Heritage, but still have great and relevant materials. That's fine. We would just want the majority of the materials to be from New York Heritage because we're the one hosting it. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but you'd obviously want to think about, if you're not partnering with that organization, at least you'd want to have a dialogue with them about, using their materials, even if they're in the public domain. So it's not a surprise, or they don't feel affronted that you use their materials. But yeah, collaborations, I think, are the best way to do this in some form or another. If it's not curatorial collaboration, then looking at what you're working with would be appropriate. Readability. This is, hard, any kind of writing, but, trying to shoot for an 8th grade reading level or lower. And there are tools that we put in the exhibit policy that can help you assess this. Even better if you put it in front of a middle school student and see if they can make sense of it. If you have that ability, or work with a local teacher, a local social studies teacher or something to do that. So again, we don't have firm requirements for DEIA, which stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But of course, we'd love to see stories highlighted that highlight the diversity and are welcoming to all users and thinking about your language. So for instance, when you're writing the immigration exhibit, you can't talk about immigration without at least talking in part about the people who were here before all these Europeans came. So I think that was one of the challenges, is you're trying to tell a cohesive story that is bound by scope, but then you also have to look and think about how other people are going to be interpreting and understanding what you're hoping to, or what you're talking about, and I think that's good practice no matter what you're doing, but especially when you're putting an exhibit that's kind of speaking with authority, you want to make sure you're thinking about a diverse set of audience and the people you're featuring in your exhibit. Copyright is, again, the elephant in the room. So you either need to use materials that are in the public domain. You could reach out, and we had to do this a fair amount, and talk to repository holders to have them help you identify the copyright holders, or get permission. There is a certain amount of carve out that you could use fair use, in that it's an educational platform. You're using maybe a small portion of it for, and you're not impacting the commercial value of that material. You have to be really careful. You don't want to overreach with fair use, of course, but certain things, certain materials that would be appropriate for. And the final point on here is that before you embark on any of this, really you should talk to Ashley or myself, and we can help talk through all of this with you. But then also we wouldn't want you to get like too far into the process and have it be either inappropriate for New York Heritage, or have the format, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, be not line up with what you would need to do. So before you do anything, you'd want to talk to us. Just not that we're going to be really, we want to encourage all this work, but we want to make sure that you're setting off on the right path before you spend time and effort trying to put it together. So this slide outlines the structure, but I'm also going to jump off of the slides after I talk through this and show you the structure. But this is, again, pulled from our exhibit policy. And most of these are recommendations. They aren't set in stone. We've ourselves violated some of these recommendations in the exhibits that are currently up there. But the general structure is important. And this is, again, where you'd want to talk to us about whether what you have fits with what how our website is structured. So all exhibits will have an introduction. So it'll have like a main featured image, an introduction, citations, and credits for who wrote the exhibit. And then from there we have exhibits are separated, are categorized by themes. And these themes are essentially just headings. So, you might, for women's suffrage, for example, we had one of the themes was the anti-suffrage movement or suffrage and pop culture. So you can kind of divide up your exhibit into chunks that, tell a part of the story. And, 2 to 6 of these, it really depends on your topic and what makes sense. But having a few themes is helpful just to kind of divide it out a little bit. Stories are where like the body of the exhibit is really. And we would recommend 3 or 4 per theme. Again, that depends on how many themes you have and what makes sense. And this is where you're talking about individual topics, and you'll have a paragraph about each story that is taking a deeper dive into the topic. And within each story, there are objects. So these are like, if you were looking at a physical exhibit, it would be the objects that you're looking at as you're walking through the exhibit, essentially. So these can be photographs, postcards, PDFs. We are able to do audio and video embedded in the exhibit. And each one has a caption. The caption might not, that's usually like the title or something, something to give context for why is this object being featured in the story. And then of course, we want to cite and make sure people know who contributed it and all that. So again, this will be easier to demonstrate than to like you, but so here's our exhibit page. You can see all of our current exhibits. I'm going to go through the immigration exhibit because it's the one I'm most familiar with. Here's the introduction. So you can see the introduction is moderately long, kind of gives an overview of what our scope is, what our thesis is for this. Excuse me. And then we have credits who worked on it, and a citation, and a featured image, of course. All right, and then going to explore exhibit will kind of be the dive into the content itself. So you can see over here we have our themes listed as these headings, and then each theme has several stories. The journey one, for instance, we broke our own rule here, and there's a bunch of portraits. So these are like individual families that, or families or individuals that illustrate different points or different examples of immigration, what their stories were. We want to tell a big story, but then also kind of tell smaller stories at the same time. So yeah, we'll have a little bit of like the history, and then each object. Some of these do have fairly like longer captions, but you search through some of these other ones, there'll probably be some that are also much smaller. So if you click through into an object, you can zoom depending on how big the object is. You can read it. And because it's based in a repository, we of course link to where the object is in a repository. And so this one is in New York Heritage. So it links to the object in New York Heritage. So the benefit of this is you can, in this example, you can see more pages of the document, and you can get the full object metadata, which actually this one has a fair amount of. And find one. There are some, I'm sure, that are not in New York Heritage. Okay, so this one is from the New York Historical Society. So we can link to objects that are not in our repository. We reached out to New York Historical Society. We let them know we were using this. This is in the public domain, so like there's no copyright on this, but if there were, we would have worked with them to secure permission. Yep, and so if people are reading through the exhibit, they can go like page through one at a time next through the exhibit, or they could skip around using this and using the menu on the side and kind of see direct. So like, you know, we do, this is an oral history. We do sometimes have the audio embedded. We are able to do that. You know, in this case, we chose to have the her portrait instead. Yeah, so oops. Cool. So that's the structure. I guess I could have shown you the back end. The back end really isn't that interesting. It's just basically a form that we would fill out to enter the content. And on that note, we aren't currently set up to have contributors have direct access to enter the content themselves. So what you would probably produce is a Google Doc or a Word doc or something with all the content, and we would copy and paste it in on your behalf. If another arrangement had to be made, we would obviously work that out on a case by case basis, but basically you would produce the content and we would be responsible for putting it in place. So this was the workflow generally that we used when we produce an exhibit. I won't say this works for, this is, you know, one size fits all for everybody, but it kind of gives you a sense of what it took to produce the online, and in our case, physical exhibit. So, you know, the first step, of course, is finding a topic and having a appropriate scope. So we learned about 3/4 of the way through that immigration was too broad a topic. We wanted to make it broad enough that we could incorporate the whole state, but when you talk about immigration and we have like a 300-year window, it's really hard to tell a coherent, encompassing story in that and touch on everything. And it was difficult. I think that was why that project took longer than expected to complete. So scope, you know, is very important. If you've ever written a paper or article or something like that, then you of course, you know, have some sense for that. Having curators with subject expertise is important. This might be you. So like if you work at an institution and you are the subject expert, then you can, you know, enlist yourself to do it. But especially, you know, many of us at library councils, like I have a history degree, but I won't say that I'm a you know, expert in immigration. So I can do some of the work, and I did help a lot with the content for the immigration exhibit, but it was important for us that we had an expert or somebody that could help direct the process so that we were telling an authentic story or a valid story, if you will. And then, you know, I added this in, but you would want to, once you have kind of the broad plan in place, you'd want to talk to us pretty early in the process to make sure that you're on track and that it makes sense. And we can give feedback on that process and also talk you through, you know, in greater, I mean, more specific terms, what I'm going to be going through, you know, in the rest of the steps here, and make sure that you are set up to succeed. The next step for us was crafting the narrative. So this is like writing the content. So writing the body of the exhibit and finding supporting digital objects. A little bit of this is chicken and the egg, because you want to say, you want the objects that you have available to in part drive your story, but you don't want to be so limited by what you have that you aren't telling a full story just because you're trying to hit you're trying to use all these examples. So there was definitely a iterative process here where we would have a story, figure out what we had that supported that story, but then you'd also see other objects that may expand or change the story and have that kind of, you know, be a little fluid. I am going to jump off and show the Google Sheet that we use to track our objects. this is scary, I will admit, and I wouldn't necessarily do this again quite like this if I were to start over, but we were looking at our themes and our stories and what objects we had. And, it was important to us to have representation throughout the state. And then, we had our captions and we were tracking our copyright clearance. And this is also important. You want to make sure your objects are high enough resolution that they will show up properly in our exhibit platform. And our email contact, so you can kind of get a sense for at least the late stage work that went in. And then we also had we did surveys, and the curators requested stuff, and there's a lot that went into this. We looked at collections that we had that had relevant materials, and I don't think this is a good model for what you guys would be doing. I'm just bring it up just to kind of show off what went into our exhibit. Because if you would be unburdened by the, need to show representation for the whole state, or you can tell a smaller story in smaller means and not have it be quite as complicated. But I think some version of this is helpful in that you're tracking your permissions and you know which objects go with which story, and kind of know how it all fits together, because this we were going through and copying and pasting it into our platform as well. So once we kind of had that started, and these weren't necessarily in exact order, some of these things were happening simultaneously. So we were going through and getting copyright permissions and notifying repositories if they were in public domain. And we had to be, I learned, once I thought about it more, you had to be kind of careful how you phrase this, because if it's in the public domain, you technically don't need their permission, but you also don't want to phrase it like you're asking permission even if you don't need to, because then it would be bad to use it if you never heard back from them. So being careful on how you phrase things. So of course, be respectful, ethical, but then also not being, especially with the number of objects we were doing for the number of organizations, we had to be careful that we didn't get stuck in limbo. It is important. And I'm realizing I'm running out of time, right? I'm out of time technically. So I'm going to kind of wrap up this quickly. The stage that got us kind of caught up probably the most was editing and review. So we did a lot of revisions on our narrative, and that took a long time. And then we put it back to the curators to have them give final approval. And we uploaded, so we copy and pasted a lot of it into the repository. That was kind of, it was done by that point. We didn't really, we made edits after the fact, but it was pretty much done when we were putting it up. And then we were doing a physical exhibit, and for the suffrage exhibit and the immigration exhibit, we worked with a graphic designer, which frankly was the majority of our cost. We had cost to pay our curators, which is important, and then cost to pay our graphic designer. But the graphic designer we used the same one for both times, and he did a great job of taking the raw material, distilling it down, and focusing on visual interest. Because if you see an exhibit across the way and it doesn't look interesting, what's going to bring you to walk over and read it? All of you that work in museums or put together exhibits know that. It was definitely important to us. And then we printed it and circulated it throughout the regions, and each council elected whether they wanted to print their own copy and circulate it. And at one point we had multiple copies of multiple exhibits, but we've kind of given away some of our extra copies and, working within our means. Yeah, so that's that's really all I have about that. And again, this is the broad overview. If you have a specific project in mind for an exhibit or any of the things we discussed earlier, the best thing to do is to reach out to us, and we'll talk to you about it directly. Any final questions, comments, anything else that you'd like me to talk about? And I will be making, I'll try to make it available as soon as possible. There's a couple of things I probably won't include in the slides, but for the most part, we'll make sure all the links work, and we'll make as much available as we can. And I will also look into some of those older, sessions that we did. All right, not seeing any questions. Thank you all for coming. Again, maybe someday we'll have this in person again. We can have more of like the networking and socializing part of this as well, which is harder to Zoom. But it's great to have all of you here, and I hope this was informative. And I hope really that this isn't the end of the conversation. So reach out to us. Let's talk about your projects. And there are also things that we didn't even touch on today that we might be able to help you with. That never hurts to ask. And we're here to do whatever we can for you guys. And look forward to hearing from many of you. And I hope a lot of you submit access and digitization grants, or reach out to us about DigLab quotes, or any of that stuff. All right. Thank you, everyone. And signing off, I guess. Bye.